Attention! Present! Arm!
We thank you for the blessings of body and soul that you granted this departed brother, whose earthly remains we now lay to rest.
Ready? Aim! Fire! Ready? Fire! Ready? Fire! Forward arm. Left, right, face. Order! Arms!
Grandpa.
Whose grandpa's that?
This is the one that lives on Hoot Lake.
You know what your kitchen cupboard
What's his name?
in your kitchen?
Steve.
What you used to call him?
Grandpa with the station wagon.
Brodico bez plovinog priklane, vždyť sam prošao na sve 4 strane, ali ni drnima slita, nima mojeg cvita, najmilijeg od cilega svita. Ali ni drnima slita, nima mojeg cvita, najmilijeg od cilega svita.
I don't know what the situation was aboard ship. I guess they put the men in one place and the women in another, but my grandfather came along with her, so when he left Yugoslavia, he left his wife there, our grandmother.
My grandfather came over evidently before my grandmother, but when she came, then she got to Ellis Island and had to go through an examination and whatever, and she wasn't allowed to enter the United States. She had to go back to Croatia because she had a cough. That's, my mother told me that.
Most of the kids that were born right in the house. They didn't go to the hospital. I remember somebody being born. I was in the living room, and the door was close to that little room next door, and I remember mother screaming, you know, labor pains. I couldn't figure out what was going on. We lived across the street from the Cuyuna school, and I was walking across the street going home from the school, and all of a sudden I heard this whistle. I thought nothing of it. It was just a regular quitting time for the miners to go home. But the whistle didn't stop blowing. It continually blew and blew and blew, and it kept blowing for an hour. And I said, something's got to be wrong. So I went home, and in the meantime, Mother got a message that they had a disaster and a big accident at the mine that everybody was working at, including my dad. And so Mother decided to go ahead and crank up the Model T Ford. And my brother Steve at that time was about 9 or 10. And I didn't know that he could drive the Model T Ford, but he did. And he knew enough to go ahead and turn the petcock off and fill the radiator, because otherwise it would have froze. But that was February, so it was pretty cold. Anyway, he cranked up the Model T, and the two of them drove to the mine. In the meantime, other relatives from other miners were there, you know, congregating around the shaft. And about 2-3 hours, Mother and Steve showed back up at home and broke the news us that there was an accident, everybody in the mine was drowned, and that was the end of it. It was a sad thing right there. But he managed to make the circuit and brought Mother home again. And my granddad was supposedly working the same shift that my dad did. And the night before, I think he got a little too much rakia. And rakia, in the American language, is whiskey. And he had a big hangover next day, so he didn't show up for work, and he stayed home. And that's how he got out of being involved in the getting killed in the accident.
Okay, this is a picture of my grandpa back in 1943. And this is my grandpa now. Hi.
Hello.
What is your name?
Steve Magdich.
Okay. When and where were you born?
When? 1913, and I was born in Cuyuna, Minnesota, about 20 miles from Brainerd.
Well, I fell in love with the guy when I first knew him, you know, when I was a young kid, and I would expect him to go ahead and take me every place he went. And I liked to tag around with him because he was my, you know, my big brother. He was always looking for my welfare. After we lost our dad, Mother, she was instrumental in taking care of the cows, milking the cows 2 times a day, having a garden, canning all the food for the winter, which that's actually got us through the winters.
In the fall, they'd mow the hay, dry it out, turn it over, put it in shocks. My mother was a little bit of a woman, and she would handle those shocks of hay and throw it up on the hay wagon, and we used to ride on the back of the hay wagon on this bumpy field, and it was fun. We were having fun, they were working. And then they'd go to the barn, and then they'd fill the hay loft. She was such a tiny little thing, and she worked right alongside the men. My grandfather would be sweating and wearing his winter underwear, and they were really tired at the end of the day. My mother kept going, but we girls at home were able to, rincing pails and pails of lettuce and peeling potatoes and cooking and getting stuff ready for their supper. So we all kind of pitched in and did a little bit. We'd sit in the porch. We had a screened-in porch that was covered with grapevine, so it was nice and cool in there. And we'd sit in the swing and we'd sing at night. And my mother and my grandfather and my stepfather would converse in Croatian. We didn't pay much attention to them. We just sat there singing and swinging.
My granddad was a kind of a musician. All he could sing was Yugoslavian songs, and he had an instrument that we called a tamburica. It was handmade, and he had his favorite songs. He knew what the chords were, and he sat upstairs on the bench by the fire in the wintertime, and he's one song after the other, just repeating and repeating and repeating. And
it was the same old thing. Dum da da dum da da dum da 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 dum da da dum da da dum dum da dum da da dum da da dum da 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 dum da da dum da da dum da da da, over and over again.
You got to go ahead and hang up the tamburica on the wall and crawl in bed, and that was it. When Steve first started to play the harmonica, he was about 11 or 12 years old, and I saw him playing, and then I just told him that I'd like to go ahead and learn how to play it. It sounds pretty good from here, and so we both used the same harmonica. We couldn't afford two of them. We played the same one. I think, and after I got through playing, I washed it off for him, and he washed it off for me. And I don't know how many we wore out. But when he played, I noticed that he played the notes backwards on the harmonica. The lower notes are on the left side, and you play up the scale. But he turned the mouth organ upside down, or rotated it, and he got the bass on the right side and the high notes on the left side. And I don't know how we learned, because it's completely backwards. They just adapted to it, I guess. So I learned everything from my brother, except he was backwards and I was forward. Then I remember Steve on Halloween night, he went down the street to a place where the people lived. They were called the Revanders, and she had a big wash tub, galvanized wash tub in the yard always. And one night Steve stole that thing, and he climbed up the Cuyuna tank. And he lugged that tub all the way up there, up to the railing around the base of the tank, and he tied there and walked down, and for days and days and days that thing is hung there. I don't know whether Steve told anybody what he had done, but he told me. I'll never forget that.
Steve, he always wanted to be up in the air in an airplane. I guess he loved heights.
After he graduated from Cuyuna School, went to high school in Crosby. That was what everything started happening here, really. The Magdich has had an unusual athletics disability, I want to call it. We crossed our legs and sat down, but we couldn't touch our knees to the floor. I don't know whether you can do that or not. And Steve couldn't do it, and they were exercising out in the field, and this coach, or gym teacher, come along. He was a mean guy. He leaned over and pushed Steve's knees right down to the ground, and I think it was really, really painful. And he never forgot that, and he quit school at that point. At that time, my mother had remarried, and she married Vinko Jelicic, her stepfather. And he and Steve at one time got a job working for the section gang, taking care of the railroad between a certain distance, Aiken and probably Brainerd. And they led around for a while, and then he decided to go ahead and join the Navy. And that's another story.
I don't know where he got the idea or the notion that he wanted to join the Navy, and he did. And I suppose that's when he got, maybe you might call it wanderlust. Maybe he was bored. He wanted to do something else with his life. So anyhow, that was goodbye, Steve.
I joined the Navy when I was 17 years old in 1930. was assigned to one of the big guns there, 16-inch guns. That was my job. I was a primerman. They loaded out down the breech and it came down and I put the primer in there and then they'd shoot the shell out and you can see them shells going through the air. That's how big they were.
I went on board the Lamberton in 1936, and he was already aboard. But we used to have some great old times aboard, and I must say that your dad was a help to an awful lot of people. And everyone loved him. Everyone just thought the world of him, you know, because he was that kind of a guy. He was one of us, you know. We used to call him Magdich. He never said a word, you know. We got along famously, and you know, I was a pretty good old boy, and I tried my best, you know, to do my best in the service, and he knew it, because he liked people like that. He didn't go too much for these people that went partying and everything else, you know. He was that kind of a fella, quiet, and kept to himself, and didn't say too much, but he knew what was going on. He was not one to slough off things, you know. They put me in a bunk. They put me in a second bunk, and that other bunk was always up like this. Nobody ever touched it. And I'd ask Musho, you know, the other coxswain, and your dad, what bunk is that? Nobody ever touches. Oh, no, don't touch that. Oh, that belongs to Babcock, first class bosun mate. Aha, old Claude Andrew Babcock. I'll never forget that name. He used to smoke cigars. When the cigar was up like this, it was okay, but when it was down, watch out. He used to get after us. We used to have, you know, this is old time stuff, but there was a urinal that they all used to go and sit down and kind of read the paper while we're going to the bathroom. And he'd pussyfoot in and take some paper, and just before it flushed, which would go all the way underneath everybody, he'd set fire to the paper and put it in the water and let it float down. And everybody come running. We were stationed in San Diego, and we pulled target for all the fleet. And by target, I mean, you know, target practice. And they would shoot at the target and so on and so forth, see who came closest and all that. And even your dad was a little up against the idea of wearing hip boots, going out in a boat to turn over an overturned target. I mean, you get water in those boots and boom, you're down. And the captain was always on our tail, you know, to put those boots on, yes sir, oh sure, yes sir. And bam, we'd sneak away out of it. But we turned over many a target, and I remember the day that the ships were firing. They were over the horizon, and there was an airplane right up above that would direct the fire. Well, he wasn't directing the fire at the target, he was directing it at us. And the shells were hitting and going between the stacks. The only guy that saved us was the radio man, the chief radio man. He immediately, you know, said, cease firing, you know? And somebody caught the good old hunky-do that day, boy, I'll tell you. But I've seen your dad get up there many a time and water up to here, you know, and coming over the gunnel and everything else. And boy, he was right there all the time. One hand for the government, one hand for, for Steve, yeah.
He was making basic pay, but he still was taking a percentage of his salary and shipping it to Mother on a separate check, actually, and he's lived on what he had left. So that kept our family going.
My mother could depend, I think it was $15 a month. And when that time came, that check, I don't know if it came from the government or from him, but it was on time, all the time, for years. And she would remind us that Steve had done that. So we all know that. Even though he wasn't with us, he was thinking of us. A wonderful man.
I got out of high school and I had a couple of jobs back there, but I couldn't get a job in the mine because the quota was filled. And I didn't have anything to do, and I figured that Steve made a success of himself in the Navy, so I figured I better do the same thing. So I tried to enlist in the Navy, and they sent me to Brainerd for my physical. The guy checked me over and he says, you know what's wrong? I says, what's wrong? And he says, you got curvature of the spine. He noticed that my curvature of spine when I was walking away, and he says, you're physically unfit to be in the Navy, we're going to have to turn you down. I was in a communication with Steve, and I told him about it, and he says, I'll tell you what I'll do. He says, I'm going to send you a railroad ticket, or money for a railroad ticket, and you take the train out here, and we'll see what we can do for you. I says, okay, what can I lose? So in the meantime, he's feeding the family, you know, all the salary he was getting, and part of the salary. Oscar Palm was a friend of mine, got a ticket, and we both took the train to San Diego, and he collected Oscar and I in the baggage, and he put us up in the boarding house on 5th and Hopper, and then paid the dues, of course. And then he decided to go in and enroll me into the Rhine School of Aeronautics, and that was a 6-week course, and he had to pay money to do it. And at that time, Steve didn't have the 100% the tuition to pay, and he talked the guy into go ahead and pay the half of it and then pay the balance when I graduated. He says, okay, and he wanted to make darn sure that he got paid that second half of the tuition. So he gets on the phone, he calls up the main plant, and he says, I want the personnel department. He says, I'm sending the guy down there to put him to work immediately. And he was going to be dang sure that he was going to get his tuition because he's going to dock it out of my salary when I got, start getting paid. But I went to work on the second shift, and 2 days later, Steve got back from an overs where he was overseas, and he paid the tuition off, and I went to work, and 41 years later, I was still working at Rhine. I retired from Rhine. The Navy didn't help him out. He wanted to decide to go on his own and take flying lessons and pay for them, which he did.
I knew that he had gone up flying, and I said, where did you learn how to fly? Oh, he never said why or wherefore. I just learned. Oh? So one day I said, well, can I go up with you? Well, okay, so up we went. And I enjoyed myself tremendously. Well, from then on, we'd go up there and fool around up in the sky and look down on the beaches and this, that, and the other thing. And one day he said, come on, we're going to go somewhere. We went up to Palm Springs, all the way from San Diego to Palm Springs. And we landed there at the airport. Now, there were no planes then, just a few cars lining the thing, and here comes this two-winged airplane, and we come down in there, and boy, it looked important, and pulled up to the line, and out hopped two sailors. Well, who should be there but Jack Benny and his wife, Mary, and we had a wonderful time just meeting and talking to them, where are you from, and so on, so on. Well, we got to answer all the questions. And, you know, as the good Lord would have it, years and years later, I worked on the Jack Benny program. It was amazing, you know? So we had a wonderful time, we really did.
He was a pretty good flyer?
Excellent, excellent flyer, even at that time. And he wouldn't go up until everything was revving up just perfect. He was well liked by everyone, including all the officers, absolutely. They all respected him as a man. And that's the best part of it, you know, when you're respected as a man and not just as a sailor.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
And when I was in Phoenix, Arizona, when the war started, I was a civilian, but they needed instructors, so I instructed a lot of pilots to taught them how to fly. I turned out about 75 students. Then I joined the service, and I got to be a warrant officer. Checked out in the P-38 and A-20s and B-25 airplanes and C-46, C-47.
Clear to take the runway for a takeoff, over. Roger, forward leader from breakneck. You're clear number 1 to take off. Roger, breakneck.
That's what I was doing in Long Beach, California, ferrying airplanes from one place to another for modification. Put guns in one place and cameras in another. We flew to Australia, New Guinea, Hawaiian Islands, and a few of the islands in the South Pacific.
He very rarely came home unless it was on leave or furlough. And then he was here for just those few days, and then he was gone again. And I can remember my mother crying when he came, and she cried when he left, and we didn't like the crying, so we used to kind of leave home until he was gone, which was kind of sad, but it was sad anyhow for her.
Then I got orders to go to India. So we flew to Brazil, and they flew across the South Atlantic and then to Africa, and finally got to Lamberton in India. We were hauling pipe from India into Burma. They was going to build a gas line into China.
I was a radio operator, and I had just sent the message that we were 8,000 feet and an hour, half an hour from our base.
Well, in fields he was, buzzing those villages.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
they go down in the valley, they come up.
Yeah.
And he wasn't using enough power.
We went around that village, went between those two hills, and there was a higher one there, and there was no way to turn around. He tried pouring the power on.
I did that.
Oh, you poured?
Seeing I was going to crash, and I pushed everything forward. And I was coming back on the wheel. I could climb.
I tried to get a mayday out.
We come down in the trees.
Yeah.
We mushed in, going about 60 miles an hour. And I busted my elbow. Yeah, both engines were ripped off and they tumbled down the gully. And we didn't have much gas, so that's what caught fire. I climbed up through the window, got up on top.
Yeah.
See, the body, the fuselage of the airplane was about 10 feet above the ground.
Yeah.
We had to jump the cargo door down. We spent the night inside the airplane, and the tires were down in the gully, and the tires were burning all night long.
Scared? Well, the first night I don't think I was ever scared in my life. It's when those drums, the big drums, you remember how big those were?
They were scooping all night.
We were living next door to her in Cuyuna, and she came running barefooted through the snow, and she's just devastated by that telegram, and we just had to wait on any further word that she may have got from the Army. But we did continue to write to him because I like to encourage her to believe that he was still alive and would be coming home.
Remember, I tried to get the IFF working because that prop went right through my radio. hoping that somebody had heard the mayday and were coming looking for us.
And my arm was giving me a bad time.
I had 2 syringes of morphine, and when he really got in pain, I gave him a shot of morphine. And then that wore off, and I gave him the other shot, and that was it. But the elbow itself was out of the socket, but it was way back in here.
Yeah, it was puffed up.
Yeah, and so when he got under where he wasn't feeling any pain, Woody got a hold of it here, and I got a hold of it here, and they twisted and finally got it back in there, but it still felt to us like it was broken. That's why we put it in a sling. Then we took off. And you remember coming down there that we were so thirsty we couldn't hardly talk. You remember the first time we met the natives?
Oh yeah, they were headhunters.
Yeah, headhunters. In the middle of the village there was a big clump of bamboo, and on each one of those was a skull.
We didn't know for sure how these natives would.
Shoot, man, we put our guns down, and we put our knives down, and we held our hands up, and waved at them. Remember all those, the natives were all dressed up with the feathers and that. Yeah. They were taking them on. We were sure they were going to get us.
They turned out to be friendly, though.
Yeah, we go into the village, and we were hungry. So we were trying to make them understand. They finally understood, and they pointed at chicken and maybe some eggs and that. You remember, they brought a bunch of eggs out, and they were almost ready to hatch. But we ate them, you remember? One mate ate one run, so the rest of us all ate. Remember, they let us into that hut, and there were 4 almost fresh heads on top of a upright.
You remember, we hired some coolies to help us with our gear. They knew that they would be paid with salt.
Yeah, 80 pounds of rock salt for each one of us, and 200 silver rupees. You remember, 200 for the whole bunch.
They brought out flyers before us.
Yeah.
And so we started marching out. But then it took us 3 weeks to walk out. Up and down the mountains, there's a lot of climbing.
Oh, it was jungle. All along that river it was jungle. But there was a good path that we went.
Oh, I remember one path was pretty steep there. We had to pull ourselves up by the roots of trees.
Yeah, and those natives would go up there just as easy as could be.
It's a good thing we all had GI shoes.
Isn't it the truth?
But a lot of times we had to stay in a village maybe 1 or 2 days because of the weather.
Yeah.
You know, the natives were friendly. They'd invite us in for supper, and they had corn or fish mash. And,
you remember the fermented
corn whiskey?
Corn whiskey that they had?
Yeah. And that one chief there seemed to be head muckim up there.
Yeah,
he invited us over for a drink.
Yeah.
And we drank the stuff because he would feel bad if we didn't.
Even though the survival manual says, do not drink any of the whiskey or beer or other fermented.
It's either that or get your head chopped out. I remember that Southern Comfort.
That one the other I had.
The chief, he took a swig of it and he spit it out right away. He didn't like it.
He didn't like it at all.
So that was all right. There was more for us to.
Yeah. Remember that one native that had his foot halfway cut off? And he
yeah, that poor kid. It was infected.
And, so bad.
I put some iodine or something on it.
He never even winced. I remember that.
They sent one guy in the head from this village to, he went up and down these hills until he got to Mukachong.
Yeah.
And this British official up there, he sent a message to our home base that we'd be in a certain village at a certain day. And then they started dropping us supplies.
That first air-sea rescue plane that came over, the first thing they dropped us was a walkie-talkie.
Yeah.
First news we got, you remember the first news?
Yeah.
Was President Roosevelt died.
They dropped salt down on one village.
That's right.
The wrong village.
Yeah.
And the guy says, I'm going to chop off a few heads.
Yeah.
He's going to go and take the salt away from him.
Yeah. We were a rugged-looking bunch, weren't we?
Yeah. Well, I was in good shape when I got out of there. 23 days, boy, that was it's something. I didn't feel it that good.
Hey, there wasn't any spare fat on us, was there?
I felt real good.
Yeah.
And when I got back, well, we had no choice. We had to walk.
We had to walk.
And then, well, after the war, there was no flying, of course, as far as I was concerned. So I was discharged in '46.
When he came home, he didn't stay very long. His life was in the service.
2 years later, I re-enlisted in the Air Force, and I made staff sergeant out of me.
He was really good about writing. Going back and reading the letter that he had written when he was in Germany, it was an intelligent letter. It was a wonderful letter. He talked about how they were conserving their environment. And then he said, we're here to democratize the Germans.
Okay, how did you meet Grandma?
I met her in Fergus Falls. I was still in the service. I was recruiting in this area, and we went to the cafeteria on Lincoln Avenue. Me and another friend of mine went in for coffee, sitting in the booth there, and then Hazel walked in with a couple of other girls. They had coffee too. She was working in the electrical store across the street, but we didn't meet there. After the girls left, I asked the waitress who this girl was, and she said, oh, she's my aunt or something. So they were kind of related. And then I told her, I said, oh, I would like to meet her. And that was it.
When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore. When the world seems to shine like you've had too much wine, that's amore.
We got together. I had a few dates with her and got to know one another better, and we just up and got married.
Goes me, but you see, back in old Napoli, that's amore. That's amore.
I got a lake behind me here, boot lake. I got a lake but no boat. I had 11 years in the Navy, I had enough of water.
He'd come up with something you couldn't quite understand what he meant, you know, and you'd figure it out. And if you didn't know if he was kidding or not, and lots of times he was kidding, of course. But it was great, you know, to know him.
We had around 140 residents on each unit. And then as they would come in, if they were real combative, they came up on that unit. Probably the most dangerous residents that we had in the hospital at that time.
In 1967, we went back to visit him in Fergus Falls and got a terrific trip through the state hospital where Uncle Steve was working at the time. And it was a chance to see a side of him that I otherwise would not have known. His relationship with the patients was one of acceptance and non-judgmental. But in going through certain parts of the hospital, the patients would yell out to Uncle Steve and he would be equally friendly to all of them, always a smile, always happy to see them, and they were obviously always happy to see him. It was a real interesting tour, but it showed a compassionate side of him, a very accepting side of him.
Oh, he was great with the patients. I know one patient, every time, they had a backyard out there, but they had a fence around, you know. And this one, every time we go out, he'd try to crawl over the fence, and it was high. And your dad had to climb up, catch him by his legs if he could, and pull him down. But every time Steve was there, it seemed like he knew what Steve would do, you know. He'd always say when we go out, he says, for God's sake, now, he says, you're not going to climb over the fence again. There he'd go the minute he got out the door.
He always had a cute way about him. I mean, he always had a smile, you know, that's one thing. But he'd kind of like try to play like little jokes on you, you know, and stuff like that. It's like he was telling us we were wanted somewhere, like things like that. Or you're supposed to go down the office.
You know, he'd say things, and you'd have to stop and think, is he kidding or... Yeah, I liked working with him. He was nice.
He wouldn't go anywhere without a flashlight. If you went on a trip in a car, you had to have a flashlight. If you went to bed, he had to take a flashlight. And wherever he went, he always had to have a flashlight with him. And that was all the time. As long as I've known him, he was that way. Every time he had a hole in the shoe or boot, he'd have duct tape on it. Everything was duct tape. He said he couldn't live without that. And even on his car, he'd put it some place, you know, if it were chrome or something, he covered up with duct tape or something. And that was one of his main tapes. Well, he was really good, sociable guy, and always could have fun with him.
had any major accomplishments in your life?
Major accomplishments?
Yep.
My biggest one is learning how to fly. I wanted to learn how to fly, and I did learn.
Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up the long, delirious burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
He was one of my best friends, and I hope I was his best friend. He was always willing to help. That was his way of life. He'd help other people more than anything, and he enjoyed it. Never made a big story about it.
If he knew anyone was in need, he would be there to help them. If he knew it, he did it. He was that kind of a man. He was caring and kind. A man who had gone through a lifetime that most people don't have the opportunity to live. We can look back and thank God that he took care of him.
You know, he was an officer, you know, if he was a flight officer. I still had that in to me that, you know, officers you really don't associate with. I thought I was real close with you. I thought I really liked him.
If you knew him, you'd never forget him, let's put it that way. I mean, he was always well-liked, friendly.
He was a wonderful guy, and everybody liked the guy, and he got along with everybody. I'm sure glad I had him. I think we all are. If he didn't do what he did for me, why, I wouldn't be here, Tom. I owe my whole life to him.
Your dad, in my estimation, was one of the most wonderful guys that I've ever met in my life. And if he was your friend, he was your friend, believe me. He was a good man, a fine man. And you were all lucky to know him, just like I was. Good.
Long ago it must be, I have a photograph. Preserve your memories, they're all that's left you.
Sun is up, time's at hand. There's a stir across the land, and so begins another day on life's highway. On city streets, down country roads, like a stream the people flow. There's bread to win and toast to pay on life's life's highway. There is hope with every turn, a bridge to build, a bridge to burn. Here's hoping you never go astray on life's highway. We are young, then we're old, passing through, then passing on, like the roses bloom and fade on life's highway. Step by step,